Hello. Did it. Yay.
I would like to thank all of our friends who are joining us on Facebook Live today. We're here today. I have the pleasure of co-hosting this with Clare Freeman, who is the head of Cathedral Capital's Elevate division. And I'm going to let Clare introduce herself, and then we'll get started and dive into making data-driven decisions.
So hello, I'm Clare Freeman. I head up the more bookkeeping side of the Elevate team and special projects and integrating things so that they talk to each other. So I have had the pleasure of talking to a bunch of you, and hopefully we'll have the pleasure of talking to more of you.
Okay, we're going to get this started. We have a brief presentation, and we want to make this interactive. So if you have questions, you can submit them online on Facebook, and we will do our absolute best to answer them as we go through this. So I'm just going to work through a bit of the technical details here because Clare is more of the technical person than I am. And let me share my screen. And hopefully I will share the correct screen. Okay.
Yay.
Woo! So Clare, we want to talk today about making data-driven decisions. And I know that you are an expert at this. And before we get too far into the conversation, can we talk just a minute about why data-driven decisions are important?
They're very important because many times entrepreneurs have a feeling about how things are running in their business, but they don't have any empirical data to really show them that feeling, to validate that feeling, or to show them that maybe it's not quite as true as they had thought. So, so the collection of data is so important.
Right, and so, you know, we have some phrases around CathCap, and you and I were at a conference for the American Bar Association earlier this year, just before COVID hit. And one of the phrases that we came across was random acts of marketing. And often I find myself and many of our clients making decisions based upon one data point. So the value of data is in what? The trends, is in the volume of data. Maybe you can kind of define data a little bit.
So often people think that they aren't collecting data, but they really are collecting it. It's just not compiled where they can use it. So there's a whole bunch of data points. There's all the activity that goes in and out of a bank. There's all that activity that happens with your employees. There's all the activity that happens with your marketing. And so all of that data is there. The collection of the data and being able to use it is really the most important thing.
So I think that you've brought up some points that I'd like to go through here. Oops. You know, we talk about we're going to talk today about the need for data, you know, random acts based upon one data point, how we get that data, right? You said it's there, but how do we accumulate it? We're going to take a look at our current systems and then talk a little bit about maybe how you get to or when you go to an ideal system to gather that data. And then a little bit about the plan and what are some tips and tricks and warning signs about developing a plan if you want to make more data-driven decisions. So here's some of the items which you've talked about to me when we talk to our employees. Maybe we could talk a little bit more granularly about what types of data that one might encounter to make these kind of decisions, or to understand these elements of any business?
So, so every business, no matter what you're doing, you have employees, you have to get your word out, so you have marketing. You're selling a product or service, and that costs you a certain amount of money. And then you have to know if you're selling it for enough to be successful. So it really doesn't matter necessarily what the main concern of the business is. What matters is that you collect, that you're collecting this kind of data. So let me give you an example. Like, to know whether or not your marketing effort is working. So are you tracking when people call you? Are you talking to the people that call you about why they're calling you, or where they called from? Or are you taking the analytics that are provided by your SEO services and really understanding what they're telling you and validating it? Because often they'll tell you, it's in their best interest, hey, we're doing a fantastic job. But they're giving you enough data to validate it. So if they say, hey, we're having your phone ring off the hook, and you go to your phone records and none of those numbers are matching up, then that's a way to validate that information. And you have the information about who called. So it's a purposeful way to say, okay, you almost have to start backwards. What do I want to know? Right. So
what do I want to know about my employees, right? As an owner of a business, I want to know if they're being productive. Right. Where would I go about getting that kind of data?
So this does depend a little bit on your industry, but you would have to know, are they actually billing the amount of time they should be billing? Are they completing the same number of things that your industry standard says they should be completing in a period of time? Is there a measurable result to what they're doing? And is it fair? Is it a goal that you can measure and that it's attainable and it's recordable? Is it fair? So it kind of does depend on what the company is doing, but there's a lot of information in almost every industry about what industry standards are. So you would have something to gauge against how much productivity you're getting.
Right. So what I heard you saying is that when it comes to my employees, I want to make sure that I make smart goals for them, right? So specific, measurable, and the data comes into it being measurable, which then gets into it being fair. And obviously I want not only for my employees to be productive, but I also want to understand if I'm having high turnover, right? What kind of data could I get out of it to help me reduce my turnover?
So it's really important, although painful sometimes, that when those people leave, that a frank conversation, that you understand really why they left. Because people will most often tell you, and there's some real value in what those people tell you, even if, because most of the time people say, oh, they're a disgruntled employee. Mm-hmm. But there's some real value in those conversations about why and what you could do to make it different. So along with our random acts of marketing, one of the things that we see really often is random acts of employment, where someone feels good. So or we don't want to get into a disagreement with somebody, or there's a bunch of social reasons why you would make a decision, as opposed to a data-driven decision. Am I getting what I'm paying for? You're paying for X, and am I getting it?
And that brings up a good point, because everybody thinks of data is something very numbers based, right? It's a 0 or 1, or it's so many hours. But you brought up a good point of when you hire new people, one of the things we work with our clients a lot on is developing what their core values are, and then measuring people as to whether they align with their core values. And we find that that when they interview for people, and particularly particular jobs, that they want a particular personality type, right? So they might do, you know, one of the variety of assessments, whether it's the DISC or the, you know, there's a culture index or whatnot, but that it's really important that you decide what's your goal in hiring, and that somebody, you use data, right? You have them fill out surveys or whatnot before, and that you say, yes, that person is exactly the type of person, not just the salary and not just, you know, do they have the resident degrees and whatnot. So that's interesting, because I never thought of that process of interviewing and aligning somebody with your core values as being data driven, but I guess it is. So we talked about employees, and you know, so much of data driven decisions, if you don't have a predisposition in engineering or accounting or something like that, the numbers can get overwhelming, right? It just can be seen like too much information. And for me, this happens a lot with marketing, right? Because all the acronyms, well, the CAC, the LTV, the ROI, the MRR, you know, it's just intimidating for a non-marketing type to dive into this data. So talk a little bit about how maybe on the marketing side, you can do it simply.
Yes, so because Pam and I work with lots of attorneys, and I always have in my entire career, I learned something early on, the value of a good story. So when something makes sense to you, it innately makes sense to you. It's pretty usually what's going on, right? It's the good story. It's the reasonableness. So when you're looking at marketing, it's important to find out what works. So on a very easy level is the people that call you or buy something from you, ask them why. Equally as important, if someone calls and you can collect their data and you aren't whatever, and they make the decision not to, there's as much value in not to as there is in when someone does go ahead and make that purchase. And a lot of times people think, well, the value is in somebody who said yes. But if the person who said no told you why they said no and it was correctable, then all the people that align with that same person are now open to being customers of yours.
Because you can learn
instance,
to know. Mm-hmm.
If you live in one area, and for whatever reason your service is only going to be in that one area, and people call you from another area, then your marketing needs to exclude those other areas, because it's a waste of time to have those people call you because they're never going to be a client. Okay. So finding out why you don't fit is as valuable as finding out why you do fit. Okay. The other thing that's really important about marketing is that you understand who you're talking to. So the context of who you're talking to. So often we'll have somebody say, well, I would never do that. And they're like a 20-something. And their market is like someone who's closer to my demographics. Well, I don't really care what you would do because you're not my avatar. You're not my client, right? And so that's really valuable perspective to understand who you're talking to. I think a lot of people don't understand who their client is.
Okay. So at CathCap, one of the things we do is we look at the return on investment, because we know our clients are going to do random acts of marketing, right? And that's fine, right? Because there's a certain experimentation that's inherent in marketing. But what we want to do is say, okay, so you spent $10,000, what'd you get for it? And in essence, that's what a return on investment says, is what'd you get?
And let's say you say nothing. There's a lesson in that as well. Okay, we're never going to do that again. As long as it's measured and you got nothing, you got a lesson.
Okay. So marketing, right? It can be simple or it can be complicated, because we also do a lot of e-commerce businesses, and for them, the CAC, which is the cost of acquisition of a client, and the lifetime value, LTV, of a client, and their monthly recurring revenue, their MRR, are all live or die statistics that they need to understand to make it in the business. So some of our clients actually like to be and are predispositioned in this segment of data to be spot on, but they often lack the data when it comes to the other areas. So with that, I'm going to segue from marketing, because we have a mutual, whoops, I got to go backwards here. We have a mutual client who who does an excellent job at marketing data and not such an excellent job at the next category, which is margins. And part of it is because it hasn't been a priority. So talk to me about the value of knowing margins and the data behind margins.
So this is something that I hear all the time. We're going to just grow big enough where it won't matter. Where my margin won't matter because I can grow out of it. The reality is, if I sell one thing, so I sell a car and I lose $100, and I sell 100 cars, I lost 100 times 100. I didn't change any of the bottom line information. And so you can feel very successful because you have a lot of activity and you've sold a lot of stuff and there's a lot of commotion, and you get down to the bottom of your P&L and it says $200. So you've got to understand what makes it worth doing, that all the costs that go into it, everything that goes into developing that product, so that you know that you're pricing it appropriately. So it can feel like, what did they used to say? So much activity instead of proactivity. Like, you can be very overwhelmed by how much you're selling and it's coming in there, and then you get to the bottom and you're like, well, that wasn't hardly worth it. And so these margins are super hard, and especially right now with the market going everywhere and, buying things early, and where do we put them, and all the unpredicted things that are going on right now. It's really important to understand what something costs you to produce.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, we have, one of the books that we like to talk a lot about at CathCap is Mike Michalowicz's book, Profit First. Right. And so everybody thinks that you start with sales and you subtract expenses and then you get your margin or your profit. And then from that, then you decide how much the owner gets, right? But talk a bit about how sometimes you can take data and flip it upside down, like Mike Michalowicz does with Profit First, and do the calculation so that you get out what you want.
Right. So it's almost a protection. So if you think of it like your paycheck, so the government takes their section and you have what's left, and that's your resource to make it, right? So if you think about that same thing, most people apply that in their business, where they'd say, okay, here's my revenue minus my cost, here's what I have. But what we want you to do is say, okay, here's my revenue, here's the percentage of the revenue that is my margin or my profit, and then here's what I have left to run it. So that you don't leave the profit to, gosh, I hope that works out.
Whatever's left over.
You take it first, and then you keep your cost within your cost limits. You don't go outside of those cost limits. It's especially when you're dealing with cash, a cash flow situation, it's really hard to keep that in mind when you have the cash in the bank and you're like, well, okay, I can just spend it.
Mhm.
So it's much easier to keep that in mind if it's a very strategic, planned out decision beforehand. This percentage of everything I bring in is profit. It's set aside and it's not available to use for the cost. It tends to be it's an enlightening way to look at it, to turn it on its head like that.
Yeah, and you bring up perhaps what we often find, and they've done studies on this, that the one thing of data that all of our clients look at is the what does the amount in your bank say, right? And if it's a high number, they spend more freely, and if it's a low number, then they get anxious and they don't sleep. And so part of gathering the data is to develop trends and is to plan, so that if you're in a cash burning situation, that you can feel more in touch with it, and not so driven by the number of the day.
Right. It's the plan. It's in the plan, as opposed to, like, the scariest thing is when a client will say to me, well, I look at the bank balance at the bank every day, because that doesn't really tell you anything at all.
Right.
And so it's kind of a false meter. It's kind of like when you're trying to lose weight and you weigh yourself every morning, and then you tend to act on that result, whether it's good or bad. Calling the bank every day is equally as uninformative.
Right. So here are the different ways. We've gone through the different ways of why it's important, and the types of areas of the business that data can help you make better decisions. Let's talk about where our data lies, right? We in preparation for this call, we had a bit of a laugh, but a moment to describe all the current states of people's systems for data, right? The Patchwork System. Everybody has their own SaaS, right? The spreadsheet company, everything's in Excel, right?
Right.
We only have QuickBooks because we have to file our taxes, right? Or and then there's the underutilization, because, of course, people said I had to have this tool and I have it, so everything must be okay. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the path of how people end up on here, and the pitfalls in each of these scenarios?
Yeah. So the Patchwork System starts with, most entrepreneurs start out with a rather small group of people, and they have enough infrastructure to start their business. And then they outgrow some portion of that infrastructure. And then, depending on finances, they either will go and get an app that will plug that hole, or they'll get the next module that might plug that hole. And then they'll find that maybe that hole didn't get completely plugged. So I know if I put it in Excel, then I can keep track of it. And I don't have to trust this Patchwork System. And then they'll go to some industry meeting, and there'll be lots of software people there, and their software is going to fix everything because it'll do all this stuff, and which most of the time, they're being honest with you, it would, if you have the staff that knows how to use it, if you've got a plan, so people will buy this piece of software with great intention, and then never really implement it completely, or underutilize what it's doing, or be fearful of letting the patchwork go, and so they don't completely embrace the new system. So that's kind of where you end. So you end up in this situation where it's just not quite working. That's kind of your classic Patchwork System.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Patchwork systems, spreadsheet systems, underutilizing systems are all just par for the course for the entrepreneur, right? You're going to go through these stages, right? And at some point you're going to say, or somebody's going to say to you, well, what is this piece of data, right? Tell me what, your return on investment on marketing is. And you're like, or tell me what the utilization of your staff is. And you're going to go, and you're going to say, okay, we need to, for lack of a better word, take the next step, grow up, evolve. And you want to get into a place where maybe you come up with a scorecard that you want to have. And so that you want to have a system that can give you all the inputs so that you can track your key metrics, right?
Right.
Let's talk through, the steps of what you need to think about when you evaluate upgrading or taking the next step up in not being so primitive or so in your approach to your systems and where you keep your data. What do you need to consider?
So you need to consider the things that do work. So we want to keep everything that is working for you, right? And you need to consider that all of the data that you've collected so far is valuable, and we want to maintain it in some way. So those two things are really important. The next thing that's really important is that every stakeholder has a say. Because if you go into a firm and they're running their system on something and the accounting people were the ones that went and picked it and they don't really understand production and the production people hate it, or vice versa, it's not going to really fix. You need to be all together as a company. It needs to work. And while there's not going to be anything perfect, you at least need to get the stakeholders in a room to negotiate what is a break it one way or another, right?
Right.
So you need to find where you want to end up.
Right. And so one of the steps might be with that room with all the different stakeholders is take an inventory of all the current patchwork pieces that you have.
Yeah. And it might be shocking because you might have like 2 or 3 things that do the same thing. You might have people that are using an app that is outside of the system. The sheer amount of apps you're using might be startling. An inventory of where you are is super important. As well as, this isn't as important as it used to be, but it is important that you know what hardware you have. Because when you're going to buy software, you need to know that it will run properly on that hardware. And the whole Mac PC world, you really need to make a company decision, and then everyone has to live on it. Running them parallel just never seems to be that effective.
Yeah, I was on a call this week with a client who's looking to upgrade and spend the money for a more robust system. And so we had somebody from the inventory management side, we had somebody from operations, I was on the call from the finance side, and then we had somebody from the marketing side. And it was fascinating in this demo that we were watching. And, in the short demo, the people giving the demo thought that we were primarily looking at this product for its e-commerce ability. And on the call, the inventory person ended up doing inventory management and forecasting, which is a critical piece of this business, ended up doing most of the talking. And I didn't even get to the point which I had a real problem with the product, which is it doesn't have an open API. And so it wouldn't integrate with QuickBooks. And I'm like, without QuickBooks or another, accounting system of that scale, it's just not going to work. So it's really important, as much as to have all the stakeholders, is to listen to all the stakeholders and see what's not negotiable.
Yeah. And then there's also like understanding the qualifications of whomever is going to own the system. So software works very much like a parent-child relationship. There's a parent where the communication goes down, and there's a child and the communication does not come back up. I actually have kids and know that's not how it always works, but that is how it needs to work. And so the owner of your POS system, whichever system that ends up being, somebody's got to own it. And there's got to be some very clear rules about how we put things in, how we take things out, and some very clear distinctions, because junk in, junk out. So if you get the information in there clearly, at least all in the exact same way, you'll get the answer. Because all reporting is you ask a question and you get an answer. However, you need to consider that you're asking about an 8-year-old boy. And so if you're not completely specific, there's no on the other side, there's no like thinking outside of the box. You need to ask a very specific question. And if it falls out of that specific, you're not going to get the same answer. So it's as easy as how many of my clients are in Texas? And you ask the question by saying Texas as opposed to saying TX, you get a different answer.
Yeah. I think that ownership is key, and you know, we've seen where it's gone wrong, where people own their little bits, but nobody owns the whole system. And to get that commitment when you're trying to choose a new system to go with on who is going to be, it's never going to be the owner, who's
No.
going to be the decision maker, who's on how things are done. Which gets a bit to making a plan on how you go about implementing and migrating to this new system, right? Because you talked at the beginning that capturing that legacy data is critical. Clearly, getting buy-in and ownership of the decision is another key piece of it, and putting somebody in charge of the project, right? But the training piece, because we've seen people put in systems, and when there's not an owner of the database and shared ownership of the need for the product, they underutilize it.
Yes, and so they'll often buy things, especially with service industries where you bill by the hour. They'll buy things from a software person that says, we're going to help you capture more time so you can bill more, which sounds great. But then you have people not using the software, still working in their old system, and then moving the information at the end of the day into the new system. And so you're not seeing this return on, you're not seeing any more time captured or anything like that, because you don't really have people working in the new system. You don't have that buy-in. That's really important about training.
Right. The other thing is, it takes a long time to implement a good new system, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And the most important thing is a plan, like a really nitty-gritty plan. Like every time we do X, we're gonna call it this or that or whatever. A very detailed plan, because software, again, I go back to that 8-year-old boy, it's set up to do exactly what you tell it to do. So the more clear you are, the better result you're going to get. Right.
I think it also takes to go to a new system. We have a client who realizes they're underutilizing their system right now, and they want to commit to this. And part of it is committing to the dollars it's going to take, but there's also hidden costs, right? Because they're going to commit people who know their business to doing an administrative or a non-billable task. And it takes quite a bit of stamina to not only get something up and running where you can actually invoice your clients or receive inventory or ship or things, the basic things of business, but to implement things to a level where the data is useful for making decisions takes a lot of stamina, because as you said, the devil's in the detail, and you really have to stay committed to, we're getting this system because we want this type of reporting.
Right. And usually it comes back to one data point that drives everything. So if you're selling things, that one data point could be that the way you identify that thing that you're selling, because that's the way you identify how much it costs you to make it and how much it costs you to sell it and how much you sell it for. So the thought process of that one thing's name can be critical, because it's going to follow it and affect every bit of reporting from the beginning.
So give me an example.
So for instance, let's say you sell blue jeans, and you have a SKU for blue jeans.
Skinny jeans?
Yeah, skinny jeans. And you have a SKU for blue jeans, and you have a SKU when they're red. And the red dye costs more, but you're selling them on the website for the same amount. So if you just have them all in jeans, then you have no idea what the additional cost is for that red. You have no idea how often somebody orders red versus blue. You don't necessarily have any idea of how many red or blue you have sitting in your inventory. You have to understand that from beginning to end. And like things like that have a shelf life, like jeans, where they're not in fashion anymore, you're going to want to have some data point that tells you the season that was in. You're going to want to have sizes, obviously. But those things identify how you bought them, what it cost you, and how you sold them. And that data point stays the same. Those jeans stay the same from the day you bought them to the day you sold them. Mm-hmm. And so often what will happen is, another example is, so say you're selling something. Well, I know that Pam likes to bake. So say you're selling the end product, the cake. If you don't know what goes into that cake when you sell it, then you don't have any idea what it costs you to sell it. So you have to understand what you're buying, and it has to be specific quantities and how you have it and the turnover and all that fresh stuff. You have to keep track of all of that stuff. And then what it takes to make that particular cake. Mm-hmm. And then what you would get for it. But identifying all of that it's crucial, no matter what you sell, whether you sell a service or you sell a thing, or even if you sell your own time.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving that example, because my niece's birthday was yesterday and she's coming over tomorrow, and so I have to bake the birthday cake tonight because I do birthday cakes for the whole family. And so appreciate you raising that item on my to-do list, right? Okay, so there's lots of things to do, if you want to upgrade your systems, and clearly a lot of thought needs to be put into making the selection, and then committing to and being realistic about what it's going to take to fully utilize it, and not to overspend or think that you're doing okay because you bought a tool that can do this, but you're not doing that with it. We see this a lot when clients buy products that have workflows in them, right? And they haven't taken the time to the devil's in the detail of writing out those workflows and putting that in. We have a lot of clients that are flat fee clients, and they don't collect their time. They don't collect that data because they don't see the value of it. But if you don't collect that data, then you can't evaluate if you're pricing your product right. We're doing a system implementation of a very easy tool called T-Sheets, which is an Intuit product for a flat fee client who's really trying to understand what does it take to he has ideas on how he prices his offerings, but he really doesn't know. And so it's interesting as we're defining the steps, and we're going to talk through the data, and then we're going to tweak it, and we're going to tweak it, and we're going to tweak it, and then we're going to add accountability. And what he hopes to get out of gathering this data is not only pricing his product right, but helping him sell better and get the kind of clients that they make money on, right? Because not every client is the same, even if the product or service that's offered is the same. So I know you and I are both very fond of data and the value and how it improves, the non-tangible elements of a business, like, do you enjoy going to work every day? Talk a little bit now about our services, right? You work a lot with data and data products and apps and add-ins and all that kind of stuff. Talk a bit about what the CathCap and specifically the Elevate group does.
So what we try to do is we'll often have a client come to us with a patchwork system, and they need to have systems that are more robust, or they need to be collecting data that they aren't capturing right now, even if they have the data, or there's a lot of efficiencies in systems talking to each other. So used to be when you had an accounting system, you'd sit down, you type in every check you wrote, and you type in all this, and if you can just feed it from the bank, you've eliminated all that typing, and it's more accurate. There are a lot of tasks like that the efficiency gained from them is what we try to do. We try to have as many things doing the work that's robotic, that's not thought, that it doesn't take any thought, and is done the same way every single time. We try to get that to where that's not what your staff's spending their time on, that you're spending their time on brain power. And it's also alleviating some things about accountability. So we have many, many clients. For instance, we just have this one win that I'm ecstatic about. We have many, many clients that do a lot of business with Amazon. And at the end of the month, they'll have like 25 to 100 Amazon purchases where it just says Amazon, $25, Amazon, $50, and you have no idea. And then it's a big scavenger hunt. And so we've just implemented for several of our clients where Amazon will dump directly into QuickBooks and match up with their credit card, and no entries required at all. And you have a backup and a copy and the whole deal. So sometimes that's the biggest impediment to collecting data, is that it can be tedious and boring and not much thought process. It just wrote over and over. So we really try to capitalize on how we can make you more efficient.
Well, and that's the key, Claire. Even if we know that things are disconnected, lots of small businesses don't have somebody like you that can go out there and can find a tool that would work, that can test it out, that can see the pitfalls. A lot of people out there don't even think about it, right? Yesterday you and I spent time finding the manual approach to getting this report out of Amazon.com. And that was overwhelming. It was like all this little itty bitty fine print. Sure, there is a manual process that you can get that out, but it's absolutely inefficient. And what I love about the Elevate team is that you're not reinventing the wheel, right? You've done this, you've solved the problem. So many businesses have the same problems, but yet we all suffer in silence. And you guys can very efficiently implement, whether it's bank fees or maybe you talk a minute about some of the Zapier
and inventory. So many things are e-commerce and Shopify and all of those platforms are great, but they all do have, like with everything in life, pitfalls and things like that. And those can talk to your accounting system and they can collect data for you, but often they aren't set up because that's not really their role. They really just want you to sell a bunch of stuff. And while all that infrastructure is there, they don't really care if you use it one way or another. So we try to go in there and say, okay, we have all this great data. Let's get it in a format where we can use it and make some decisions. And one thing that I really love about my job is often people will come and they're just beyond themselves. Like they just have stopped looking at their financials because it's like a year behind, or they don't make any sense, and they just kind of like, oh my goodness. And we love to unravel that. That is probably, it's rewarding, and it makes such a difference in your business to understand what your numbers are and to really make good decisions.
And it's a gift, right? Because not everybody's cut out to do that. I think a lot of people view their accounting systems as simply a way to filing their taxes, and they don't know that if you understand the data, the information that's in your accounting system, that you know all the pitfalls of a business.
Right.
All the sins are hidden within the books.
Exactly.
So thank you for that little infomercial you did there. I appreciate that. So as we say, at CathCap, let's make it about you. Let's make it all about you. And what would you say if you were one of our clients was listening and had questions? How would they get a hold of you? How would they be able to have you take a look at their specific challenges and if CathCap can help?
So the easiest way to get a hold of my team is to probably email me. It's Clare at CathCap.com. And you can
find. How do you spell Clare?
I know. Actually, no matter how you spell Clare, I get it because I have the aliases of all the different ways of spelling it. And so, but you spell it like Clarence, like a good Irishman, without an I, and at CathCap.com. That's probably, and if you go to our website, you can see my profile and you can just click through and not know necessarily how to spell it. But that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us. And then what we would do is we'd give you a call, and this has been it's an interesting process because what we'll do is we'll get on the screen and we'll look at where you are, and it can often feel like someone rummaging through your underwear drawer, and people often are like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or that it isn't a commentary on anything other than we just need to kind of understand where we are, where we're going, what you're looking at. So we would probably do that. Show me what you got. And
with confidentiality and
obviously, yes,
professionalism and no judgment zone, right?
No judgment whatsoever.
It takes a lot to surprise us, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And and accounting is not everybody's thing. Like that's just a given. So.
But if you find a good accountant, then hold on to them because they're worth their weight in gold, right? They can surely get you out of a lot of messes. So as we wrap this up, we've talked about the value of making data-driven decisions. We've talked about understanding your own data. We've talked about how to upgrade your system. What parting comments do you have for entrepreneurs out there that might help them know if they're doing okay, or things that maybe questions they should ask their team on Monday morning?
So the one, boy, that's a great question. The one thing I usually ask people when they first come in contact and they ask me about financial questions, I usually ask them if they can read their financial statement, because to the rest of the business world, that balance sheet, that P&L, really tells your story. And if you don't know what your story is, and you can't tell that story in, whatever the best light is, if you don't understand that story, then that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that you know the business, you know that story, and we're helping you present it in its best possible light.
Okay. Who doesn't want to have, it's kind of like getting your hair done, right? You want to walk out and present the best version of you and the best version of your company. And I guess my final thing is, until you get the data, you don't really know. All you have is a feeling. We have a mutual client that we work with that said, oh, my team is so busy. Every time I come in, everybody tells me about how overwhelmed they are. And I'm like, okay. And we pulled the data, and what did the data show us?
Yeah, they were not busy. They were busy when she was around.
Yes, right. They looked busy, right? They had the emotions. And one of and this is probably one of my proudest moments, was we put in simple data, and we tracked it, and we had trends. And then we helped give the owner some talking points to coach people. And without adding one additional dime of cost, she got her revenue up, 25%?
25%.
Just by paying attention to the data.
And it was positive attention, where, you wouldn't have gotten the same result if you just said, Bill, it was positive learning attention.
Right. Well, with that, Claire, I am so thankful for your time today, and your wisdom and your insight and the breadth and depth of your experience. I think you're uniquely placed to help entrepreneurs because of your disposition and your "you can't scare me" attitude. And helping them make the most out of what they have. And, everyone wants the ideal system, but I think you and your team do an excellent job of pacing a client to get to the ideal and understanding how much time they can devote to it, and being that excellent coach to get them where they want to be. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, I can't wait to hear some new stories. Be educated on some new industries.
Yes, we always like learning, and we always like new challenges. So we hope anybody out there who's listening to this either live or recorded can bring us some new ones. So thank you. And we'll be in touch.
Bye.
Bye.